Welcome to Gaia Radio, an educational call series offered by Gaia University. Each month, the call series covers topics on eco-social regeneration. For more information, check out www.gaiauniversity.org. For today's call, we have Jennifer English talking about conscious action management. This is the final of a 3-month call series on managing time, managing promises. Jennifer begins by sharing how she's been working on her own conscious action management system for 10 years and then has refined it.
I've refined it, particularly in the past 5 or 6 years, to a system that has been mostly low stress whilst I am managing a lot of different projects. So I have been the executive director of a nonprofit. I have been, at the same time, with that nonprofit, it had 6 different active sub-projects, which I was the project director of. And at the same time, I had 2 LLCs, which are limited liability companies. So I had a lot that I was managing at one time, plus a homestead, which my partner and I have a permaculture farm. So it was quite a lot, and I have downsized. Those of you who know me have also know that I've recently downsized. But for many years, I was able to manage this all through this conscious action management system. So those of you who have access to the slideshow, if you could go ahead and click on slide 2, gives you a little bit of a definition of what I think conscious action management is, which is applying basically a further degree of consciousness in making and managing decisions using tools such as routine reflections, dynamic presence, to balance form with flow. So consciousness is key, having tools that you trust is key, and then this access to balancing form with flow is the other key to conscious action management. So you can think of form as also structure and flow as in fluidity. Okay, if you can go to slide 3, here are the different tools that conscious action management approach offers. We have cultivating simplicity and working on proactive attitudes, power of manifestation, routine reflection, dynamic adaptability, patterns and flows, packaging information. Those different approaches can be divided into 2 categories. The first 2, the cultivating simplicity, proactive attitude, power of manifestation, those 2 bullet points, have to do with shifting your perception, whereas the remaining bullet points have to do with shifting your action. So today, I've given you the entire slideshow, though we may only get through shifting perception. We'll see how far we get. I am going to use conscious action management, which is dynamic steering, to see how far we get in the presentation. It is my intention to at least get through the first 2 points. So you can go to slide number 4. So here, the first step is changing your perception around cultivating simplicity. And to me, if I was going to make this analogy with gardening, I would say that this is the stage in gardening where you're preparing the soil and planning the layout of your garden. So this is very foundational. It's almost like you're preparing the vessel, or, maybe you could say the temple, your sacred spot. To cultivate simplicity really means to increase your consciousness and to cultivate low stress and simplifying all aspects of the process. Stress is the biggest time consumer. It impacts our performance and our health. We waste a lot of time in stressful situations, either because our bodies or minds or emotions are busy doing, dealing with fear, anxiety, or other stressors. So one of my favorite books is Voluntary Simplicity by Duane Elgin. Now I'm going to read something from his book. And I'm going to ask that every time the word voluntary comes into his words, that you substitute the word cultivating consciousness, or just consciousness. So Duane says, to live more voluntarily is to live more deliberately, intentionally, and purposefully. In short, is to live more consciously. We cannot be deliberate when we are distracted from life. We cannot be intentional when we are not paying attention. We cannot be purposeful when we are not being present. Therefore, to act in a voluntary manner is to be aware of ourselves as we move through life. This requires that we are not only paying attention to the actions we take in the outer world, but also that we pay attention to ourselves acting in our inner world. To the extent that we do not notice both inner and outer aspects of our passage through life, then our capacity for voluntary, deliberate, and purposeful action is commensurately diminished. He continues to say that voluntary simplicity as a manner of living that is outwardly more simple and inwardly more rich, a way of being in which our most authentic and alive self is brought into direct and conscious contact with living. This way of life is not a static condition to be achieved, but an ever-changing balance that must be continuously and consciously made real. I love these two pieces of his quotes because it really brings in this sense of that balance between, the inner and the outer, the form and the flow that I was talking about, and this part where he says that it must be deliberate, purposeful action. So the next piece around cultivating simplicity, I think, that has made a huge impact in my life is making agreements with myself. And where I made agreements that have really impacted me is through the Toltec Wisdom, a book by Don Miguel Ruiz called The Four Agreements. Has really changed my life. And they are, be impeccable with your word. And that basically means to speak with integrity and say what you mean, and to have integrity to follow through or account to whatever your word said. The next one is don't take anything personally. And that means nothing others do is because of you. The third one is don't make assumptions. Find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want and communicate this clearly so you can avoid misunderstanding, sadness, and drama. And the last one is always do your best. Your best is going to change from moment to moment, so you need to realize that it's going to be different. My best yesterday is definitely going to be different than my best today, considering that I had mild food poisoning last night. But if you can get and realize this circumstance and just simply do your best and know at any given moment you're doing your best, you'll avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regrets. And if you notice the pattern there with these agreements, it goes back to simplifying. It goes back to cultivating low stress and more consciousness. So the third part of cultivating simplicity, again, that analogy of preparing the soil and planting our garden, is patience. For patience, I think it has helped me to realize that I can't do it all right now, and I've really been learning that over the years. I have become more realistic with my sense of time. I've asked myself, to let go of trying to get too much done in such a short period of time. I remember thinking that I was going to be able to build an entire eco-village on my home site. We have 92 acres here in 5 years. And we've been here for 7 years, and we've just gotten our own house done. So time has come to mean something completely different to me, and I have a much better sense of what I, as one person, can do. So now, when I think that something may take 2 hours, I ask myself, is that realistic? Maybe I should allot 4 hours. If I think something is going to take 2 years, I am open to the possibility of it taking 6 years. So patience is something to cultivate. Otherwise, without patience, we create a lot of stress in our lives. Then the last thing for cultivating simplicity, or we could also say cultivating consciousness, is trust and honesty. So first, trust. Basically, count on yourself. Trust your system to capture and accomplish what it needs to. Use it regularly. Also, let go and don't micromanage yourself. Trust that it will be better than you ever imagined. And your system is both the physical things that we're going to learn, probably later in this presentation, and also these more shifts in perceptions. And then next, honesty. Be honest with yourself and others. Have the integrity to follow through with your words or the ability to renegotiate your accountability. Again, learn to be more realistic with your capacity and let your words be that reflection. So that takes us back to the 4 agreements as well. Okay, so again, if I see that someone else has joined us, if you do have a question while I'm talking, you can raise your hand by pressing the number 2 button. And otherwise, I'm basically going to just provide content, and then in a little while, I'm going to open it up for a think and listen. So if you could go to slide number 5. So when I first brought you to this presentation, I said that the first 2 pieces had to do with changing your perception. So another aspect of changing perception is having a proactive attitude. And the first element there listed is basically proactive in general. And that to me has to do with seeking solutions and opportunities for learning. I was very involved in helping organize Transition Town Hohenwald. And one thing that the whole group realized was the success of our efforts was being proactive. We only focused on what was going well and put more energy into the projects that were already happening in the community and those that were succeeding. When there was problems, which is the next bullet point, we were proactive in our problem solving. In permaculture, we say the problem is the solution. And I often think that problem solving has to deal with opportunism. The third one is edge pushing, breaking through physical, mental, and emotional blocks. Now, edge pushing is something that I talk about a lot if you've ever been to any of my other events or calls that I've led. Edge pushing is really huge for me. I think that it's the way in which we learn. It's the way in which we expand our ability to deal with stress, which is really important. And one of the reasons that I've been able to handle so many different projects, when I introduced myself, I told you the different projects I have managed, is because I have time and time again pushed my edge. And then I was able to basically deal with more stress than some other people. We all have different things that stress ourselves out. I'm not saying that I don't have a lot of stress. I do, but it's not around management. It comes from other areas in my life. One thing that happened to me really recently around edge pushing that I hadn't really thought of is I got exposed to a toxic chemical, and I started developing mild asthma. I actually have health insurance for the first time in my life. And I went and took advantage of that and went to a cardiologist and had my circulatory and respiratory systems checked. And because I was having difficulty breathing, and they put me on this treadmill, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am just really having trouble breathing. And they're like, well, does this happen a lot? And I said, yeah, it does. And they're like, well, do you ever push through it? And I was like, gosh, I never even thought about pushing through it. I just normally stop because I feel like my body's being taxed and I need to slow down and breathe slowly. And they're like, well, just push through it, And I for the first time in a year, I was like, okay, I'm going to push through this. And a couple of minutes later, I was breathing better than I had been in ages, just from getting my heart rate up that high and pushing that edge. And that was such a breakthrough moment for me to realize that there are edges that we're pushing in every part of our life. So I want to read something from one of my favorite books. This is a book that I read back in 1999, and it's still one of my favorites. It's called Living in Balance, A Dynamic Approach for Creating Harmony and Wholeness in a Chaotic World by Joel Levy and Michelle Levy. They actually start out in this section by quoting someone else, which I'm going to go ahead and do. So they have O-sensei, the founder of martial art of Aikido, was once asked by his students, "How do you keep your balance all the time?" The master laughed and said, "The art is not in trying to keep your balance, but in losing it and seeing how fast you can regain it. The reason you don't see me out of balance is because I regain it so quickly." Then they go on to say, and this is the authors, "Embracing life as a learning expedition is the first step toward realizing balance. To understand this, it is helpful to understand the difference between living in your comfort zone and in your learning zone. Your comfort zone is what you are familiar with, what you already know so well. The knowledge is almost automatic. Your learning zone is anything that stretches you beyond that, challenging you to new skills, new ways of relating." And then they go on to say, "The journey towards balance begins by becoming mindful of the invisible walls, boundaries, conditions, and mindsets that define our current personal comfort zone, and then exploring the new frontiers of learning that are your learning zones." And to me, that is the essence of edge pushing. Okay, the next proactive attitude is focus and commitment. We're still on the same slide. So focus and commitment has to do, for me, focusing our attention on being present with what we're doing, giving 100% to the task at hand. I don't like to multitask, although I catch myself doing it. I always say that I prefer stacking functions. Stacking functions is when we take our goals and objectives and meet as many of those as possible by doing one task. So whatever I'm doing, if I'm on an advising call or if I'm gardening or working on an output, my intention is to have focus with that essence or focus with that being. And the commitment piece is to view the process as an active experiment. I know a lot of us, myself included, have different levels of fear of commitment. If we can view commitment as short-term active experiments, then we avoid being triggered or, as we've been talking about, being stressed out about making these commitments. Then we can have the integrity to complete these short-term commitments. And even if it does cause distress, it takes us back to the edge-pushing piece. If we find ourselves in distress, we're probably pushing one of our edges. We're moving through a potential block. And we can remind ourselves this is an experiment. It's a short-term commitment. We're going to do this for the sake of learning and refining, or maybe not even refining, but being aware of our edge. So it expands these edges and then our capacity. And if nothing else, we learn and discern for future actions. So we maybe made a mistake in creating this commitment, and we learn and not have to make that type of commitment again in the future. So in essence, we're altering our internal constructs and questioning our implanted reaction patterns, basically going back to optimal balancing. Also with commitment, it's important to not only keep commitment with others and your experiments, but keep commitment with yourself. Learn to create boundaries around your personal time and refrain from taking on too much. It's definitely important to learn to say no. It's okay. For a long time, I was volunteering in many, many different positions. This was back in the days when I was working on a transition town. And I found myself always on call. I was managing many different projects, and I didn't have any boundaries around my personal time. Sometimes I would get calls at 9 o'clock at night. I'd get calls on the weekends. I would, just find myself working all the time. It took me a while to decide to make a routine schedule, but once I did, it was amazing. The reason I didn't do it at first was because I thought that was too mainstream. And as I evolved, I started recognizing, well, a lot of the things that are mainstream are working for people, and maybe I shouldn't be questioning them. It's how I use it. So I created a schedule where I always have my weekends off, and I only work during certain times during the day. And if I go out of that schedule, like this evening, normally I don't work past 4 o'clock, and this evening I offered to do this call. So what I did is I take time out of my workday and make that personal time, so I make sure that I'm not working extra hours unless I choose to. So the last piece on proactive attitude is to be careful with your language. So this goes back to the 4 agreements as well, which the first agreement was be impeccable with your word. So changing our vocabulary allows more ease with being impeccable with our words. Using words like need, roles, and deadlines are sometimes dangerous. So choose to use them sparingly. When you say you need, oftentimes what you really mean is I want or I can. When I was younger, I wrote a paper on the difference between needs and luxury, and very few things are actual needs. So just be careful when you're saying something that you need, especially when you tell someone else that you need it, because then they can take that personally and choose, you're not responsible for that, but it can affect them, and then they feel responsible for meeting your needs, and that can be a potential stress on their lives. The same thing with roles. The word role means a lot of responsibility. So be careful in using that, and the same with the word deadline. Instead of using needs, roles, and deadlines, consider using wants, accountabilities, and milestones, which are much softer and very much more changeable, less fixed words. So if we can change our perception around these words, we can create less stress, and that's where we're going back to. We're going back to cultivating consciousness. And to cultivate consciousness, one of the main things is to cultivate less stress and simplicity. So the last piece on vocabulary is to consider using words that are active instead of nouns. In Holacracy, they say actually use words, well, here's what they actually say. It says in Holacracy, they say keep it real with ing verbs. So this relates back to when I was learning to be a grant writer. They taught me, if you want to get a grant, always put active tense verbs in your bullet points. List your goal and then put active words. Say create, empower, engage, employ, initiate, disseminate. That's the first word. Don't put all these fillers in there. Have it be active. So Holacracy is going to a step further and say have it be creating, disseminating. So it's already active. It's in the present moment. So nouns, using nouns and defining yourself and defining your role or accountability often creates a sensation of fixed energy in our lives. And then we get attached to that, oftentimes unconsciously. If we can free ourselves from nouns and use verbs, then it's active and dynamic. So these, again, are all different tips for being proactive. Let's go ahead and move to slide 6. This is the last of the 3 bits on changing our perception. So going back to the analogy of gardening, our first bit was cultivating simplicity, which had to do with preparing the soil and planting our garden. Then I would say proactive attitudes has to do with sifting through stagnation, pulling the weeds, removing the boulders. This last one, power of manifestation, I would say has to do with collecting and planting our seeds. So there's some points here. The first 4, we've all likely experienced moments of synchronicity where the power of manifestation occurred. Be careful what you ask for is an old saying because it's true. Again, these first 4 listed here in this slide all are capacities we can hold to be receptive to this power. That is, capacity for visualization, capacity to believe in your success, your capacity to have an open mind, your capacity to trust in the process that you've chosen. Now these next two, recognition and repetition, have to do with how the mind works. I'm going to draw on another one of my favorite books, Coyote's Guide to Reconnecting with Nature by John Young, Ellen Haas, and Evan McBrown. Evan says in one of the first chapters, how we learn brain patterning. We humans practice routines to gain mastery in a discipline. Our tendency to form habits through repeated behavior endows us with skills, and it also shapes and defines our perceptions, which is how we notice things that are important to us. For years, we, and he's talking about the wilderness school, have referred to the process of learning through habit as brain patterning. He goes on to say, our brains take in everything we experience far beyond our conscious awareness. If we repeat an activity, a mental image, or idea over a period of time, then our brain's neurological pathways form a shortcut, so we don't need to think about it. This repetition acts like a computer shortcut that saves searching through a maze to find our application, or like the kids' shortcut through the neighbor's yard that bypasses streets to get to school. Such shortcuts streamline our behavior, and that's why it's called brain patterning. So I want to give a little analogy. To me, brain patterning has to do with, I could compare it to rainforest. Imagine that the trees are brain cells, and each tree, now this isn't a rainforest, so they're huge, tall, amazing biodiversity, very rich, each one being its own ecosystem in the sense that some animals and insects on that tree probably never come down to the forest floor. So each tree is its own collection of knowledge. Then we have paths that we as humans or animals have cut through the rainforest to get to these trees so that we can harvest the products such as fruit and herbs. Now these paths I would equate to our dendrites. And our dendrites, or these paths, need to connect from tree to tree to tree and then back to our homes where we need to collect different ingredients to put together as a combination to be able to make our medicines or our foods or our little basket of projects. Okay? So when these paths are well worn, we can easily access our information, our wisdom. Sometimes these paths get less worn, they get grown over, and we can no longer identify them. In fact, in the rainforest, if you're not using your machete constantly to keep those paths open and walking through it, it may be only a naturalist or an archaeologist that can discern where the tracks and debris are left behind. Those of us who aren't trained probably wouldn't even be able to see the path. So my own experience with this is that, again, as I said earlier, for many years, for about 10 years, I was managing a lot of projects. Okay? And with my focus and attention, which was my perception, I was able to handle a lot of information. My dendrites were connected and well worn in that area because I had such focus and such practice, such redundancy. And then as I moved out of that part of my career, not that I still am involved, obviously, or I wouldn't be doing this call, but I moved out of it and decreased my hours to only a third of what I was doing. And now, the past year, I've been tapping into projects that I haven't done in at least 10 years, like gardening and herbal crafts. I used to work on an organic farm, and I used to teach herbal crafts, and I have a degree in naturopathy, but I haven't done either for 10 years. And I began to lose that knowledge. But as I began to re-engage with those paths, to go back to those trees, I started remembering things about herbal preparations and the remedies and what they're beneficial for, and the names of plants, and the names of, I'm a yoga teacher, the names of yoga asanas that I hadn't remembered in 10 years. So it took me to change my focus and to retrack on these paths, to open them up again. And one thing that was interesting that I noticed in this, at least so far, I'm very much actively experimenting with this, is that I seem at the moment to only be able to hold so much information in my head. So prior to this, I had a vast depth of capacity and focus in a certain area of my brain and access to a certain area of my brain. And now that I've pulled out of that depth, and now I've gone into other areas, but I'm still keeping myself what I'm calling my integrated phase, where I'm tapping into many, so I have more of a breadth. So less depth and more breadth. So what I'm saying here is that we are creating neurological networks. Some other examples of how we're creating neurological networks is through this brain patterning would be my example of wanting to buy a particular car. So I got on the internet, my car broke down, and I needed to get a new car, and I didn't know what I wanted. I just looked around, and all of a sudden I saw this car. I had never seen it before on the streets. I had never seen it before on the internet. I was just really struck by this one car. I was like, okay, I'm going to get this. I'd never seen it before. As soon as I get out on the roads, I start seeing the car everywhere. Another example of brain patterning is I have a knack for whenever I go walking in the woods, especially in like creeky areas, that I always find geodes and crinoids, which are little fossils. For some reason, a lot of the people who hang out with me don't spot them, but my mind is patterned to be able to pay attention to those, okay? Where I don't have any capacity for finding arrowheads, whereas some of my friends, when we go out, they always find arrowhead. I've never found one. In John Young's work with bird language, everything in nature has a call for a reason. Marissa was at my house one day when my dog was barking, and I said, that's a snake bark. We become patterned to start recognizing things. And when we use that information, our neurological networks form. And the more networks we can create and hold fast to, the stronger the whole system, the more access. So basically, repetition, routine, redundancy, and refinement of ideas through action, writing, speaking, and or thinking creates more alignment with universal energy and attention. I truly believe that once we open ourselves to this synchronicity by having these different, what I would call, like the different emphasis on visualization, success, open-mindedness, and trust, once we open ourselves to those, and then we start patterning our brain in a way that's really useful to us, I really think we align with the universe and things start popping up that we're looking for. I truly believe that, and I've had that experience very often. So now it's time to hear if you've had similar experiences. I'm excited to do a think and listen now. If you go to the next slide, it reviews what we just discussed. So we've gone on cultivating simplicity with the analogy of preparing the soil and planting the garden. Proactive attitudes has to do with sifting through stagnation, pulling the weeds, and removing the boulders. And then our last bit, power of manifestation, which to me has to do with gathering and planting the seeds. And I guess I would say it has to do with creating the paths to the different beds as well. Number 7 is where we're at, so go to number 8. So these are now the practices. So remember, we just finished, and now we're hitting routine reflection, dynamic adaptability, patterns and flows, and packaging information. I'm positive we're not going to get through all of them, but we'll start with routine reflection. So routine reflection first has to do with presence. Presence allows for what's real and alive in the moment to manifest and impact your process. So I love Eckhart Tolle's work, and I actually like A New Earth better than A Power of Now, although I like both of them. And he shares that the true or primary purpose of your life cannot be found on the outer level. It does not concern what you do, but what you are. This is to say, your state of consciousness. He goes on to say, finding and living in alignment with the inner purpose is the foundation for filling your outer purpose. And he defines presence as consciousness without thought. So cultivating a state of presence is key to understanding where we're headed with routine reflection and dynamic steering. So the next concept is pivot point, to make decisions based on two criteria. One is real-time needs. And you can maybe only be really truly identifying what your real-time needs are if you're in a space of presence. So real-time needs have to do with what are your accountabilities, how are you feeling internally, and that goes from everything like how's the weather affecting you, how's your attitude, how's your emotions, what's coming up for you, what's alive in you right now. So the second pivot point to make a decision is a basis of your observed patterns and flows. Sometimes we're not in a state of presence when we need to tap in with our needs. So sometimes when we act, we're acting out of patterns that aren't serving us. Going back to that conversation I was sharing around edges, sometimes we're acting out of more like disrupted patterns or blocks that we've put in place or that society has sort of inculturated on us. So if we're not in a state of presence, then we can at least think about what are our observed patterns and flows. So over time, through conscious action management, you've been observing your patterns and flows and can say, okay, well, this is what's alive for me right now, and here's what's been alive for me over a period of time. Here's how I've handled this situation in the past, and here's how I'm going to probably handle it now. So it's a combination of, again, asking what's real and how can you compare that with the patterns and flows, which includes your goals, your direction that you've been taking. Sometimes it's important to change direction, for sure. Sometimes we don't follow through with our commitments because of blocks or not being present. And it takes these patterns and flows to remind ourselves, I must be in a funk right now. I'm just going to stay on course even though it doesn't feel right now. So these check-in points, or what I call pivot points, allow for great traction and tracking through observation. This in turn allows for more realistic assessments of your needs, time allocations, capacity, and general management. If you go to the next slide, here is a very practical way in which you can use routine reflection. So on a daily basis, I have reflection points where I quickly check in on those two pivot points. On a weekly basis, I do the same thing. On a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, and on an annual basis. And then I even do a bigger one every 3 to 5 years. And these help me stay focused, accountable, and help me move through both aspects of those pivot points by discerning and recognizing those patterns and flows over all these years. And again, I've been working on this for at least 10 years, so I've been able to really have more realistic sense of who I am and what I'm capable of and where I'm headed. So if we go to the next slide, slide number 10, here are my recommended moments for scheduled reflection. So I recommend 15 minutes before your workday and 15 minutes at the end of every workday, and then 60 minutes weekly, and then 3 to 6 hours monthly, 1 to 2 days quarterly, and 3 to 7 days annually, and then I generally take an entire week or month every 3 to 5 years and touch back in with what's alive in me. So if you go to the next slide, 11, these reflection points, or we could call them pivot points, are moments to check in on our values, our goals, processes, outcomes, needs, edges, highlights and constraints, learnings, roles, or accountabilities, I should say, obligations, priorities, and desired next steps, or, again, goals. So, again, you can't do all of that in 15 minutes on a daily basis. I don't do that. I only do that during the big reflections, like during the 3 to 5 year one, the annual one, or the quarterly one. On a monthly basis, I just go through it really quickly. And I have a trusted system, so I know how to access the information about my patterns and flows and my accountabilities really quickly. And then on a daily basis, weekly and daily basis, I don't even really think about the big picture. I just think about what's right in front of me, sort of the now and sooner, but not the later. And I'd mostly, on a daily basis, think more about what's alive in me in this moment. So there are some exercises that you can do that I'm going to share with you really quickly. During these moments of reflection, one exercise is to write down all of your accountabilities. On one side of a piece of paper, write down value, and on the other side, write down time spent. So you have all of your accountabilities listed down, maybe a vertical column. And then you have, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, rate each accountability for how much you value it. So you might say, I am a daughter, I am a mother, and just list your accountabilities. And actually, as I'll explain later, it's easier for us if we say, I am accountable to being a homeowner, or I'm accountable to owning a car, rather than saying, I am a homeowner, because we're using that noun again. It's a little bit more difficult when we say, I'm accountable to being a daughter, or daughtering, but it's something to consider. So anyway, you write down your accountabilities however you wish, and you value them, and then on the other side of the column, you write down on a scale of 1 to 10 where you're putting your time. So a 10 is that you're putting most of your time, and a 1 is that you're not putting very much time at all. And you'll be, hopefully, on track, that those things that you value are those places where you're putting your time. And if you're not on track, this ritual reflection point gives you an opportunity to touch base and ask yourself, how can I change this? What are the constraints? Okay? Another tool for a ritual reflection is the decision-making matrix. You can jump ahead to the next slide, slide number 12, and you can see that it's got the same concept where you're weighing different values. So you might have your projects listed across the top. So you might have realized from your patterns that you can only take on 3 projects at a time, and you just can't decide which project it's going to be. So you write the 3 different projects down in the 3 columns, project 1, project 2, project 3, and then you write your values down that you've identified. So maybe having fun is one value. Making a difference in the world is another value. Making an income, right livelihood, is a third value. Okay? So then you weigh each value. Which one's the most important? Well, making a difference in the world might be the most important. So that's a 10, whereas making money is maybe a 6. Okay? And then you go through your projects and kind of like weigh them and say, okay, this project is not going to be fun, but it sure is going to make a lot of difference in the world. So you indicate that. And whereas the second project is going to be a lot of fun, it's not going to make that much difference, and it's not going to pay much. And the third project might pay a lot of money, but isn't necessarily going to be fun or make that much of a difference. So you can weigh your choices based on how much you're valuing. If we jump back to slide 11, another exercise that we can do during these moments of quarterly or annual ritual reflection is a SWOT analysis, which is basically asking ourselves what is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and constraints with this decision or this possibility. The fourth potential exercise is going with sacred questions. You can make your own sacred questions, but some common ones that I've learned are, what is this telling me right now? What opportunity is there for me to learn here? What opportunity is there for me to heal here? What opportunity is for me to heal others from this experience? And again, you can come up with your own sacred questions. As we just had someone recently join us, I'm going to ask that you jump back to slide 9 really quick. So we're talking about ritual reflection, and on an annual, quarterly basis, I ask myself these larger questions, these sacred questions. On a monthly basis, I more or less check in with the goals that I set for myself in these quarterly and annual cycles. On a weekly basis, I mostly check in with action items that are now or soon. And on a daily basis, I mostly just check in with what is I am accountable for that day and how do I feel in the moment, what is alive in me. Okay? So if we could move to slide number 13. This is the second practice in conscious action management. The first being routine reflection, the second dynamic adaptability. There are two aspects to dynamic adaptability. And for those of you who have created learning intentions and pathway design output packets, this is what I'm always talking about. Creating a liberating structure while at the same time managing it through dynamic steering. And you can only manage it through dynamic steering if you're checking back on those two pivot points. One pivot point is what's alive in me right now. The other pivot point is what have my patterns and flows been. Okay? That's how we can dynamically steer and make good decisions. So liberating structure basically is creating a plan, a map, to increase our power of manifestation and direction. Remember what I said about redundancy. The more you speak about something, the more you map something, the more you act in a rhythm or repetition, the more attuned we get. Our neurological patterns are attuned, and these networks form and open us to the power of manifestation of the universe, bringing, energetically attracting what we need. So increasing our plan, creating a structure, really helps us with this power of manifestation and direction. Then, through our routine reflection and presence, we can go with the flow, dynamically steering our path. So this goes back to the very core principle that I shared when I introduced conscious action management, balancing form with flow. Power of renegotiation. That has to do with routinely identifying and tracking your accountabilities. There are a number of tools that you can do this. One tool that I learned from Gabriel Vieira is from the Mankind Project, where they ask questions around accountability. And those questions are, what was the agreement that you made and who was it with? What did you choose to do instead of fulfilling this agreement? What were the effects on other people? What were the effects on you? What is the shadow that drives this behavior? Do you want to get back into accountability? And if so, how will you? Is there any small service to offer immediately to get back into accountability? So another thing around accountability and renegotiation is to start by dropping your roles. In the Yoga Sutra, Sutra number 4, translated by Swami Satchidananda, says, we need to keep ourselves free of these wrong identifications to prevent attachment and suffering. And this fits back with what I said about changing our language, when I said that nouns create a sense of fixedness, whereas verbs create a sense of action and changeability. So rather than saying I'm a project manager, it would be, in this instance, better if I said I'm holding myself accountable to managing this project. So being able to set that up from the beginning allows for more negotiation capacity. Holacracy is another really good tool to look into. It's systems, organizational systems thinking that people are using for developing open enterprise businesses. Again, holacracy. And they use the word accountabilities and ask these questions. Who are you accountable to? What are you accountable for? What are you accountable for each other? And group the accountabilities into threads. And these accountabilities are defined by each person in the group based on reality of what is needed. And that goes back to what I was saying about one of the pivot points, always checking in on what is needed. So holacracy says that the entire business needs to be created based on that pivot point. So some practical next steps. I have my iCal as one of my inboxes. It has 2 stars every time I have a time obligation for meeting. 1 star asterisk for a day task is due obligation. And then no asterisk, what I call floaters, for specific tasks or placeholders for projects that are without time allotments. And this enables me to interact in 2 useful ways. During my morning routine reflection, which is one of those pivot points that I was talking about, every morning for 15 minutes I do this, I can make decisions on what's alive in me and what's on deck, and I can reschedule some obligations occasionally or easily move floating tasks because I can see, as soon as I look at my calendar, what's an obligation, what's something due that day, and what's movable. So the first thing I do is if I'm not feeling like working that day, I move the floaters. The second thing I do is see if I can move or renegotiate the things related to due that day. And then sometimes I even cancel meetings or reschedule them. So it's important to have your system set up in a way where you can access that information really quickly. The second thing that this enables me to do is at the end of each day, again, the end of the day, when I track my time, the 15 minutes at the end of each day, week, or month, I'm easily able to track the movement of my unaccomplished tasks and put them into overflow points or decide to renegotiate my accountability with that task. Either renegotiate it with someone else and oftentimes just renegotiate it with me. Remember I said that we often, myself especially, over-predict how much time we have for something. So to renegotiate, it's important that you're using clear communication. I've learned to avoid making offerings that push my need for renegotiation. Instead of saying, I'll have this Monday morning for you, I'll ask someone, when is the latest you need this by? And I'll aim to have it done before then or let you know if I need to renegotiate. So clear communication is really essential. Okay, if we move to the next slide, it has an image of my iCal. You can see pivot points for reflection and renegotiation in the morning. Every morning I have this, 15 minutes. It actually has a half hour there because half of the 15 minutes I'm checking in to do like quick tasks, which I'll get to in a moment, and then the other 15 minutes I'm doing like a really quick pivot point. Then at the end of the day, I'm doing the same thing. I'm tracking and making any renegotiations with myself, my calendar, and other people. And again, remember this ongoing tracking after so many years has really enabled me to be much more realistic. If you go to slide 15, a tool that you can use if you don't already have a tool for making quick decisions in the morning about what you're going to do that day is pulled from the Eisenhower matrix. You can either use something like my system where I have it delineated by 3 things, which are required meetings that day, required due that day, or floaters, or you could use a system like this that has important urgents, important non-urgents, not important urgents, or hopefully you can eliminate the not important, not urgent things from your day. And that way you can decide which things can be moved easily if you don't have the intention or energy or something else came up in your life. Okay? Because life changes constantly. We don't want to predict and control our life. We want to create a liberating structure that we can dynamically steer through. Okay, if we go to slide 16, here's an example of how I'm dynamically steering my week. So on my weekly reflection, I spend a little bit of time preparing my schedule for the upcoming week. Actually, on my annual reflection, I go ahead and put in things that I know are going to happen on a regular basis, and I go ahead and do my whole year. I use the repeat feature in iCal and just repeat features. And that way, I actually get a better sense for not overcommitting myself to more projects than I can handle because my calendar is already kind of filled out. You know, if I looked at my calendar and it was empty, I might be more prone to say yes, when really I've already got this sense for, okay, I have this many output packets I have to do a year. I'm just going to go ahead and put output packets, one output packet every week, and just throw it on Wednesdays. Okay? So how I dynamically steer, so when I come to my calendar on a monthly basis, I have events that have rolled over from the previous month. And then when I come to my calendar on a weekly basis, I take what events have rolled over from the week before and put them into my upcoming week, and it might look something like the projection above. So on Friday, when I end my workday, my week is already looking like this for the upcoming week. But then, after the week actually happens, notice what it looks like below. So this is the reality of it. Things don't happen as we plan. But having that having that liberating structure allowed me to get up each morning and very easily discern what is on deck, what are my priorities, and what can I renegotiate or move around based on how I feel or just unexpected circumstances. So again, you can see at the top, that's my liberating structure, and at the bottom is the dynamic steering, is me adding a gardening project because Monday I didn't feel like going to work. I much felt like, you know, it had just rained. The weeds are going to be perfect to pull right now, so I'm going to go do gardening. Some meetings didn't go as planned. Some went longer. You know, there's just all this dynamic mobility. And again, you can notice that there's asterisks for daytime due, one asterisk for day due, and that helps me very easily interact with my calendar quickly. It only takes me 15 minutes each day. At the end of the day, I spend 15 minutes going back and tracking what actually happened. And again, I do this for two reasons. One reason is because I get paid for what I do, and it creates a really easy way for me to track how many hours I've put in. The second reason I do it is because it allows me to observe patterns. So after having done this for 10 years, I have, like I said, this for the fourth time, I have a better sense of how much time it takes me to do something. Okay? The last thing I want you to look at in this slide is over in the left-hand corner. It says, notice overflow points on Friday and then past last workday. So this is a calendar that starts with Sunday and ends with Saturday. I used to go ahead and put everything, even my personal goals, on Sunday and Saturday and in the mornings and the evenings, but it became too hectic to look at, so now I just use my calendar for my work stuff. And that allows me, since I always take Saturday and Sunday off, it allows me to bump whatever is floating or renegotiated over onto Saturday at the end of my week. So if I move stuff as I'm going through the week, I just bump it onto Saturday. So you can see in that picture that there is stuff bumped over onto Saturday that at the end of the day on Friday I'm going to need to like move to the following week or renegotiate or maybe delegate or discern that I just don't, want to do this anymore. Okay? So if you notice in my original schedule that the corner up in the left-hand corner, there was a lot of space open on the Friday, which is the last day there that has stuff recorded in it. There's open space there. And those blue things, the output packets, documentation, and book, are kind of like my personal projects that if I have time, I set aside to do them. So those are oftentimes the thing that I'm willing to negotiate with myself. But I intentionally leave that openness so that it can be filled by things that weren't done Monday through Thursday. Okay, so the next slide has to do with patterns and flows. Okay, so patterns and flows, again, comes back to tracking. I feel like I've talked a lot about tracking, so I'll just say that it's important for making realistic projections by tracking our accomplishments, outcomes, and time daily. Here we go to looking for opportunities in our patterns and flows. There are some specific things that we can learn to do, and that is to stack functions, to eliminate time wasters, to remove interruptions. And I'm going to briefly read something from The 4-Hour Workweek, which is a great book by Timothy Ferriss. And he simply says that ignorance may be bliss, but it is also practical. It is imperative that you learn to ignore or redirect all the information interruptions that are irrelevant, unimportant, or unactionable. The first step is to develop and maintain a low information diet. He says that in today's society, we live in a high information, high interruption experience, and it causes a lot of stress. So understand, these are, going back to the practical sense of removing boulders. Remove the things that are interrupting. If we go back to the Eisenhower matrix, these are the things that are not important and they're definitely not urgent. Okay? The next bullet point there says creating a measure for organization. For me, order does create more freedom. I'm going to read something from Getting Things Done by David Allen. He says, a basic truism that he has discovered over 20 years of coaching and training is that most of the stress people experience comes from inappropriately managed commitments they make or accept. And I really appreciate that he's coming back to stress here in this quote. And that takes us back to the very beginning of our presentation, which conscious action management is about cultivating consciousness, cultivating simplicity, and reducing stress. David Allen says, anything that does not belong where it is, the way it is an open loop, pulling on your attention. And he says that we must clear our minds. First of all, if it's on your mind isn't clear. Anything you consider unfinished in any way must be captured in a trusted system outside your mind. So basically, we need to become selective about the information we absorb. We need to not have all these things weighing on our mind. We have our own tasks weighing on our mind that we need to put in a system that we trust, and we don't need all of these external interruptions from maybe the news or inappropriate news that you're getting or different media outlets. If they're stressing you out or causing you to weigh on your mind, sometimes it's better to ignore them. You may question that, but with this particular system, it's about simplifying your life so that you can become more productive. Lastly with this is to protect your time. We've already talked about that a number of times. So just protect your time. So again, I create a pattern of working from 9:30 to 4:30 every day, and the rest of the time is me time. So create easy, simple, and smooth systems for capturing, tracking, and engaging with information. And the most important thing is to know, trust, and use these systems, to interact with them routinely. Otherwise, things are going to slip through the cracks, and that's going to lose the whole purpose of what David Allen is saying about letting something other than your mind hold these matters. So if you go to the next slide, you can see the 4 systems that I use to capture my information. Up in the top right-hand corner is my Mac Mail. I know you probably can't see that, but I've got different folders. Well, first of all, it's turned vertically because I couldn't fit it on there any other way. But if you look at the folders in the corner up there, in the sort of left-hand corner of that image, it has cams on there. And I have files that are active, ideas, to do soon, to do urgent, and to file. So I put things in there, and I have routine schedules for how often I check them. So generally I check the Do Now Urgent every other day, which I renegotiate with myself sometimes. The Do Now Soon, and that gets checked maybe once a week. And the files I just check once a month, and ideas I check once a month. Okay, down in the bottom right-hand corner is my desk, and I have those same files: active, ideas, do now soon, or do soon, do now urgent, and to file. I have those on my desk, and I go through them in the same pattern. I only go through the 2-file once a month, and the ideas once a month, and the other ones I go through more frequently. So I trust that when I put something in there, I'm going to go back and look at it. Okay, and then the left-hand side, on the bottom, I have on my desktop the same exact files. So you might notice that my desktop is relatively clean. So when my desktop gets, 10 to 20 items on there, I automatically put them in one of those 5 files, either active, ideas, do now, do urgent, or to file. Most of them end up going into the to file. And then, like I said, once a month, I allot time, actually put time in my schedule to file those things so that I don't lose track of them. And again, sometimes I do renegotiate. I'm not perfect with this system. Sometimes 2-3 months will go by, depending on the time of the year. But at least I know where they're at, and sometimes, I'm okay renegotiating that. And I don't have guilt for renegotiating, because that's the whole point of the system, is to trust it and also to be open to renegotiation. So in the top left-hand corner, I recently started using OmniFocus. And this is my other inbox. So as I use my iCal, which I already showed you, I'm using my iCal mostly for events or things that are repetitive. Like once a month, I go through my files. So that's repetitive. So I can put that once a month. My OmniFocus is a place where I have both reminders of things that happen weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and then also just tasks that come up. In my iCal, what I do is I don't put the specific task. I just put a blotted out time that says time to deal with general management. Like I put that in my schedule so that I know not to overbook myself. I know not to say yes to a meeting with somebody on that day because I have to have an hour, because I have recognized over time that it takes me at least an hour a week to deal with bills, invoices, and just general management stuff that comes up. Okay, so these are my 4 trusted inboxes along with my iCal is how I manage my system. Prior to using OmniFocus, I was using this Excel spreadsheet on slide 19, where it has daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal, and annual. So this is something I would encourage you to do on an annual basis, is to look at what are all the patterns. There's definitely things in different categories that I have to do in the office every season. I have to deal with the quarterly taxes, payroll taxes. I have to send invoices to Guy University. There are, of course, things I have to do annually, and each tab is a different period. So I still have this system because it's useful. I actually have a number of files that I've created over the years that have remained useful, even though I'm not actively engaging with them. I kind of go back to them on an annual basis and just see if I'm missing anything, even though I don't engage with them on a monthly or weekly or daily basis. So I want to finish out this 5th section. So patterns and flows. So allocating time for the following. Make sure you allocate time for personal care, relationship care, community care, home care. Again, you may not put it in your iCal. I used to do that. I used to block out time. It got too scattered for me, but I at least put it in my OmniFocus. Okay? So be very protective of your personal time and the things that you need to do to maintain your sacred space in your relationships. Then make sure you block out time for overflow on tasks. So again, we under budget frequently to a given task, so double or sometimes triple your allocations. Again, if you think something's only going to take an hour, you might want to go ahead and budget 2 or 3 hours just to be safe. So designate time each week for overflow and unexpected. I now have the entire day on Friday as my overflow day. Thus, I don't schedule anything for that day. No meetings are scheduled that day unless absolutely necessary, because I know there will be leftover from Monday through Thursday. There's unexpected stuff that happens all the time, and I'm still not perfect about allocating the right amount of time for tasks. So Friday becomes my overflow. Another thing is to designate time each day to define your work and to accomplish quick tasks. So defining my work is that 15 to 30 minutes recommended of viewing the possibilities and probabilities. This is the pivot point that I've talked about like 3 times now. But what I haven't talked about is the accomplishing quick tasks. In a moment, you'll look back at my iCal, and it says emails and to-dos. I don't put down what those quick tasks are because I often don't know what they are. Okay? So when I get into my email, if something takes me 5 minutes or less, I do it in that designated time. I have 3 times throughout the day that I do that. I do it right in the morning. For 15 minutes, I get as many quick tasks done as I possibly can. Right before I go to lunch, I do that again. And then right at the end of the day, I get as many quick tasks due as I can. The ones that are quick that I don't have time to do in that 15 minutes, I either renegotiate with myself to stay on work for a little bit longer, or I flag them in my iCal with the flag feature. And then when I come in the next morning, those are the ones that I visit first. Okay? So I also have found it very useful to create routines around meetings. If you go to the next slide, we can talk about these pieces. So creating time and handling routine such as office management. So you can see that on Friday, again this is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So Friday is the last one filled. I have a repeat feature that is bills, invoices, and organize office. That's general management that happens every day on Friday. Of course, I can renegotiate that if I want to. And then once a month, I have a 3-hour block for managing general management. Okay, so again, notice those pivot points. Every day at 9:30 to 10, I have it scheduled in my calendar to do quick tasks and to check in on how do I feel, what's alive in me, and what do I need to renegotiate, if anything. Okay? So notice that I've, again, taken routine Saturdays and Sundays off to protect my personal care and whatnot. So I have strong boundaries around that. And then the second thing I want to point out is that repeat in meetings. So if you go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. So let's come back to the repeat in meetings, and we're on slide 22 right now. And what we're looking at is those intentionally don't schedule portions of the week for overflow. Okay? So I've got Friday totally open. And again, the blue Alpha Packet documentation is book is something that I just put there. If I have time to do it, it's kind of like my pet projects. It's not a priority, and I'm willing to renegotiate. So ultimately, the day is free from 11 till 5 or 4:30. So that's my overflow from Monday through Thursday. And then Monday is my overflow from what I couldn't get done on Friday. So I leave that open as well. So I actually leave 2 days a week open. I do occasionally make meetings on Mondays for meetings that can't fit into the pattern that I have here, but generally I always leave Fridays open. Okay, so almost finished. The next slide shows, again, those moments for defining work and renegotiating work. So if we can go to the next slide. So we're on slide 24. So here we're talking about meetings, which I was sharing. So I only have 3 meetings a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that I schedule. I don't schedule meetings outside of that. And they say advising sessions, but I send my meeting list to everyone. Like if I've got someone in my transition Hohenwald group that wants to meet with me, I'll send them that calendar, and when I go back in and change it, I'll just put, change the calendar setting so it's not advising. But basically, my main types of meetings are advising for Gaia University. So I just leave those as my only time, so that helps me in 2 ways. Number one is that when I wake up in the morning, I know, even if I can't remember my schedule, that the most I have is a meeting at 10, 11:30, and 2. So I know that from the start. Another thing is that I have all these other times then when I don't have meetings. And I've gotten to the point where I know that 3 meetings in a day is the maximum that I can handle. If you look at my doodle calendar on slide 25, you'll see that it's really hard to see, but I send this calendar out to everyone who wants to schedule a meeting. It says June and July meeting schedule. In the email that I send out, it says Jennifer's June and July meeting schedule. And if you looked on there, if you were able to see, you can see that they're only Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at 10 o'clock, 11:30, and 2 o'clock offered the entire 2 months. People select one, only one. They select one that nobody else has, and they consider it confirmed. And that's it. I don't have to send them a reminder. I don't have to send them a confirmation. I don't have to send them anything. In my email, I say, hey, if you want to schedule a meeting with me, here are my open times. Pick one, consider it confirmed, and here's my number. You can call me. And it has worked excellent for 5 years. I've had no problems with it. Okay, so that was the end of the section. I feel like now is a good time to stop. So just to remind ourselves what we covered, I'll end with a little conclusion, and that will hopefully benefit Jorge. So we started out with going over 3 different pieces that had to do with changing our perception. One was around cultivating simplicity. The second was around proactive attitudes. The third was understanding power of manifestation. That was the first part of the presentation. I actually thought that might be as far as we got. But we did get further. We got into 3 out of the 4 pieces of changing in our action, so shifts in our action. The first was routine reflection. The second was dynamic adaptability. And we just finished talking about patterns and flows.